Well, even with the urban glow of a city, wildlife still roams. On this week's segment of A Wilder View, our wildlife correspondent Tanner Saul shows us how one individual is tackling the vital research on human impacts on wildlife.
Vast wild landscapes are diminishing, and it's becoming increasingly important to study wildlife in urban environments. Chris Hansen is part of the Boone and Crockett Wildlife Conservation Program at the University of Montana.
Missoula's not a giant city, but it's definitely growing. And so evaluating how this development is affecting mammal communities is really important.
Hansen is looking for answers for the impacts on animals by humans.
What effect does development have on wildlife and mammals in particular?
Hansen uses a non-invasive tool to look at the impacts on wildlife using motion-sensored camera traps to detect wildlife. The camera locations are layered, going from highly urban zones and slowly moving outward toward pristine forests. He is therefore able to look at the patterns of activity.
Using that information, I'm able to tell both what mammals are using certain sites, but then their activity patterns, what time of day they're active, how active they are, and with that information I can see the differences between the more wild areas out further away from town versus in people's backyards.
So far, he has got over 20 mammal species around Missoula captured on his cameras.
There's a lot more wildlife than maybe people know.
Urban wildlife research isn't his sole passion, though.
I just like being involved in research and conservation. I'm interested in learning more about that system and using that information to make sound management actions.
With more analyses to progress throughout his research, Hansen has already got impressive results.
One of the coolest results of this project so far is that I've set 200 cameras. I've got 1.5 million photos from these cameras, and nearly every single camera has had a wild mammal on it. And so that just goes to show that it doesn't matter whether it's in a backyard or back country, that there's wildlife everywhere in these urban areas, and that wildlife, the species may change from place to place, but there's always wildlife around.
He ends with some reassuring words.
The future is bright for coexisting with a bunch of these wild species in town.
In Missoula, Tanner Saul, MTN News.
That's quite a yell.
That was, you know what, seeing all that is funny because I feel like this time of year going into work, or especially in the fall, I could start to see a lot more deer kind of out and about. And man, we have so many deer in my neighborhood, and I'm not kidding, guys. Like my daughter, Mary Lou, she's asked me so many times, like, she's like, Dad, let's set up a trap in our yard, catch the deer, then we'll keep it as a pet. And I'm like, Mary Lou, we can't do that. She's like, but then I'll just keep it in my room, and we have a great place for it. I was like,
She wants a horse and she wants a deer.
she wants a horse, she wants a deer. She'd take all those wildlife animals that we see running around out there.
She's gonna have a zoo someday.
Exactly. That's such a cool story, though.
You know,
really is.
one of the bad things about Tanner's stories, the video is so fascinating. Sometimes I'm just watching that, I'm not paying attention to what he's saying. I mean, I'm going to have that image of that mountain lion's eyes glowing in the dark embedded in my brain.
See, that's why we put everything online. You can watch it as many times as you want, and then you can go back and you can read it. Tanner himself actually has some really amazing wildlife photos from game cameras that he's set up that hopefully those will end up online as well.
Very nice.
Very good.
Yeah.